Okay. Part 2. So when I'm saying that, when I'm looking at Daniel 12 and I'm reading verse 4, hide the words to seal the book, that sounds like Aleph. What about the verse right before that? Why is that just dropped out of the equation? Certain things just feel like that's where it is. So does that mean that's what it is? Does that mean it was ordained? Not necessarily, but like I say, this whole thing is an exercise of the individual it's a meditation. Meditation, that's one of those woo-woo words. Stan Tenen used to say something about it being a meditation. And to me, meditation, that was something that people doing yoga did. And that was Eastern mysticism. It was bad, like tradition being bad, yet to the Greek Orthodox, tradition is sacred. What is it? What is meditation? Just stop and think about it. But the word to meditate in Hebrew, hey gimel hey, also means phonetic, the sound of the letters, to spell words regarding the sounds of the letters. And it also means rudder, helm, steering wheel, navigating. To navigate, that's what you do on the sea, on a ship, trying to figure out where you are in the middle of nowhere. But how do you do that with words? Why should that be the same exact word, hagah, hey gimel hey, be the exact same word as meditate? If we take human consciousness in this world, on this planet, as we're just a speck in the sea, one little boat in the sea of like, which way should I go? Where's up? Where's down? Like I say, if you feel like you're on a boat in a storm, in the dark, in a fog, whatever you think you can see, it's all over, and your inner ears spinning, and you got no sense of vertigo. Oh, gosh. I believe he gave us this, the meanings of these letters, keyed to the Mishkan pattern, as bearing, as anchor, as solid, as truth. So for me then to contemplate or meditate on the meanings of the letters, and then to exercise the contemplation by trying to read into scripture and say, what does this sound like? It's just an exercise. It's not sacred. I can't say, thus, there it is. Although I have said that basically with Daniel 12, and you can look at Psalm 119, and boy, it's locked in there. David wrote 8 verses under each category of each next letter of the alphabet. So it's locked in. There it is. And for me to say, hey, I can see it in Daniel 12, well, nobody's pointing at it and saying, there it is. I'm saying that. I can see it there. And I can see it other places. I can see the Mishkan pattern different places. But if somebody else wants to say, I don't believe you, then it's like, well, then don't. But the idea that I'm trying to exercise my ability to see Yahuwah's stuff. Why? So that when somebody comes up and has something like in Deuteronomy, I think it was in 13, it says if there's a prophet or a dreamer of dreams and it doesn't come true, whatever they say doesn't come true, false prophet, false dream. But if it does come true and they try to lead you to some other Elohim, this is a test from me to see whether you guys will easily just quickly stray from the path I've given you. It's a test. That's a nun samach, a test. Test and trial is also bet het nun, that would be like the watchtower. When he says he tests or he fathoms the depth of a man's heart, what does that mean? If I'm trying to figure out who exactly is Yahweh's Avot, is he the same God as Jesus Christ of the Christian church? Is Jesus Christ of the Protestant church the same as Jesus Christ of the Catholic, the same as Jesus Christ of the Orthodox? Is it the people that are different, the doctrines that are different, or is it the God they believe in that's different? It matters. And if I'm going to say, I believe Yeshua is the Messiah, but he doesn't fit the description of JC, the J-man, Jesus Christ. What? How can I say that? Is it not the same human that lived 2,000 years ago? Well, it's the same human, but the name Jesus Christ is a word that's, you might say, the pinnacle of a whole paradigm of ideology that you can say that's Christianity or that's his followers. And even if it's the same guy, that the human that walked the earth 2,000 years ago, if any of that ideology differs from our Father's will, our Father's face, like Yeshua said, I'm not speaking any of my own stuff here. I only say the things I hear my Father say. I only do the things I see my Father do. None of this is my own. Well, then, if any of the teachings of JC or the stuff that his saints teach or the stuff that his apostles teach or that his prophets get insight from the Holy Spirit teach, if any of it's different, then our Father in heaven, Yahuwah, it ain't the real guy. It's a fake. So for me to think that there's fake prophets and pastors and teachers and lies and distortions, it's the devil. Not necessarily the devil. It might be Yahuwah testing his people to say, I asked you to listen, because that was the primary regard, is that we'd listen to his voice, guard his ways, and then walk on his paths and keep it pure. And he's going to test us to see if we will. Well, I think he should just trust us. No, he's going to test us. That's the program. The way the world is set up is that he's going to test our hearts. He's going to tell us who he is. He's going to teach us of his ways. Then he's going to test us, baiting us, like the tree in the garden, to disobey what he said. So if he says, don't work on the seventh-day Sabbath, he's going to have somebody say, do work on the seventh-day Sabbath. We're going to make the seventh day, first day of the week, the new holy day. That's the day it proves you really love him, that you really believe in Jesus Christ. Change the Sabbath day, make it the seventh day, make it the first day. So is that a trick of the devil, or is that Yahweh testing to see, is anybody listening? Does anybody even care? For me to give value to each of these 22 letters by associating them to the Moedim locks them in as being his, because his alone are the Moedim that witness and testify of Yahweh's Zavot, the Elohim of Israel. I find it real interesting that the Christian church disregards his Moedim on purpose. The Christian church at large, there's a few that regard it, but it's almost like they're waving a flag proving which side they're on it, and it's not his. Gosh, why didn't I ever notice that? Because nobody ever brought it to my attention. But once we see that, I then have to sit there and say, well, what are these matters which are his? And I remember when I first started going to this Torah regard congregation, hearing about 613 laws. 613 laws. Oh, come on. Okay, what are they? Get out the checklist. And I couldn't find where, there wasn't really many computer things going on back then, but there wasn't any checklist. And I finally found a book. It was a real thick book, big, and it was like, oh, now it's talking about the 613 laws. And I started reading through, and it's like, wait a minute. One of the laws is love your neighbor. Oh, okay. One of the laws is honor your parents. Okay. I mean, there's stuff that we are doing anyway, that if we're his people or think we're his people. And I realized, other than, don't eat pork and shellfish, there was really almost no thing he ever said in any of those 613 laws that was such an argument. It's like, well, why? Just give us the list of the 613, would you? Bullet points. Boom, 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 boom. Let me check through and see what I'm offended by. The idea that we're so offended by his stuff. What part of his Torah do we find so detestable that anybody who regards it is considered anathema, a heretic, an infidel, a Judaizer, lost from the church, no longer of the kingdom, worthy to be looted and killed? What part of his Torah? And as I started looking at it closer, I realized that suddenly there's a lot of reasons not to even believe the Bible. Not even believe, especially the New Testament. And then a bunch of the Old Testament is up for questioning. And then you go, oh, great. Man, you're just opening a can of worms. They're not just worms. They're vipers. They're snakes. They're poisonous snakes. And what I realized is that because of this Mishkan pattern, and then there's 7 letters before it, and then there's a few letters after the Zadi, Kuf, Reshin, Tav, everything just fits. Everything he ever said fits. The gospel narrative of Yeshua's narrative, storyline fits. Everything seems to work. It feels like, it rings like, smells like the truth to me. But is it? So the other day, I happened to open up, and there's this one Psalm 53, and it says, oh, that we could find salvation, that Israel could find salvation when Elohim returns and returns his people, or something like that. That's verse 7 of chapter 53. It's like, think about that for a minute. Oh, that we could find this discovery, or that he would command, that Yahweh would give a command that Israel would be saved in return from their captivity. What letter does that sound like? Just thematically. Okay, so it's setting up a situation. The rest of the psalm, whatever it was saying that Israel's been downtrodden and lost and overwhelmed by the enemies and just subjugated. And if only one day, if only that day would rise when Israel could break loose the shackles and be restored as his people. That feels like a Zodi to me. That feels like the Zodi letter. Well, that's Isaiah 53. That's verse 7. And then when I looked a little closer, it doesn't say, oh, that, the finding and discovery of salvation. It says, me yetan. Well, me means who, and yod tav nun is to teach. That's kind of like, who's going to count the towers? Well, who's going to teach? And then here's this word, mem zadi yod vav nun, from Zion. Metzion. Well, Zion, zadi yod vav nun, but metzi, mem is the place of or away from, and zadi yod, that's my command. So Zion is not just from the mountain of Zion. It's either you're at the place of listening to my command, or you're away from listening to my command. That salvation of Israel, Yod Shin Ayin Vav Tav, Yishaot, Israel, Bet Shin Vav Bet. Well, Bet is a condition of when, and Shuv, Shin Vav Bet, means return. Elohim Shavut, Shin Bet Vav Tav, it's like a derivative of Shabbat, Amo, Ayin Mem Vav. It basically is saying, who's going to teach this? It's a matter of, are we regarding his commands and instructions or are we not? And that is what matters. That's the conditional factor that determines whether he's going to return his favor of us being his people or leave us languishing. That's Psalm 53. And then I read the 54, verse 8. And again, I was looking at like the one verse which seemed to really capture the heart of what the psalm was about. Quite often, David would be saying a bunch of stuff as a kind of languishing lament, and then he'd end or say this one verse maybe within the last couple verses. But in verse 8 of Psalms 54, he says, Be Nadaba. Bet prefix means in the condition of. So Nadab, like Nadab and Abihu, the two sons of Aaron, Nadab means to be a philanthropically, volitionally giving. Ben Nabab, Aleph, Zion, Bet, Het. Well, Zion, Bet, Het, that was that word for sacrifice. And Aleph is the prefix letter, means I will. So I will voluntarily, joyfully, philanthropically give my sacrifice. And then it says Aleph, Vav, Dalet, Hey, Oda. Well, Hodu and Toda both are to give praise and thanks, Hodu La Yawah. So Aleph, Vav, Dalet, if we would give English letters, that's A-U-D. Well, that's like the word audio, voice. I will voice praise and thanks, Shemka, your name, Yahweh, Kitov. And the problem is strangers have risen against me. So he's saying here that he is going to pour out this sacrifice of audio praising, thanks to the name Yahuwah, Kitov, because it's Tetvav Bet, good, welfare, prosperity. So that's the perspective of saying, if I understand who Yahweh is, he's all about balancing of scales. And as I was saying last week, what has he given his people to do? He could have given us giant stature like he gave the Nephilim. No, he didn't give us that. He could have given us great athletic skills, or he could have given us, what he gave us is a voice. Look at all the different animals. They all have features. The feature that he gave humans, voice and intellect. So we're going to think about his name. And again, name means fame, renown, reputation, which has to do with identity, which has to do with the stuff he's about, which has to do with the Moedim, which has to do with these things that are in this alphabetic sequence. So again, this is just a logical, rational determination. And I keep going over this and saying this because if people have conflicted with me, and I hear people online saying this and that and all these different arguments, it's like anybody that thinks to have this regard of these letters, well, you'll have to know how to answer to people. You're looking at alphabet letters. Why? That's where Yahweh hid the truth, like that song by Michael Franks. You've forgotten where you hid the truth. Wow, to think that he hid the truth. Where did he hide it? In the alphabet. What a concept. And then to be able to decipher it, decode it, decrypt it, and realize it's all right there. What's the truth? The truth is, you got to know his name, and his name is not just how do you pronounce the sacred four letters, whether it's Aleph He Yod He or Yod He Vav He, or his name is where he's at, and where he's at is the Moedim, including the Sabbath day, according to Leviticus 23, testify of his identity. And he's all about truth and kindness. And so every religious entity which perpetuates falsehood is being unkind, and it's not true. So in the book of Revelation, where Yeshua said, anybody who, and then the word used in English means to either create, to manufacture, or perpetuate falsehood, has no place in his kingdom. No place in his kingdom. So when I bumped into that verse, I had to realize, is the Church of Christ even the Church of Christ? Well, what if Christ then isn't the same as Yeshua? Is it even his? Is the church even his? If it is his, why is he allowing them to run like not just lost sheep, like rabid, insane sheep? Why would he do that? Wouldn't he go out and find the lost and bring it back? Man. But anyway, so this verse, chapter 54, verse 8, strangers have risen against me, but I'm going to declare praise to your name. Well, the letter kuf is to rise up, and it's that which follows, and I can see a kufness in there. Well, if Psalm 53 lines up with the Zadi in my thinking, and Psalm 54 lines up with the kuf, what about Psalm 55? And the one, verse 23, says something about ha-shalaka el Yahweh. Well, halakha is walking. Sheen can be read as a prefix of that which kind of basically belongs to. Being yoked with Yahweh, Yod, Hey, Bet, Kaf. Hey, Bet, like Aleph, Hey, Bet, Hey is to love. So Hey, Bet is the word for give. So love is what you give. So Yod, Hey, Bet, Kaf is he will give you. Vav, Hey, Vav, Aleph has to do with being or existence, the same. Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Kaf, Lamed, Kaf. Lakah is walking. Kaf, Lamed is all. I'm just trying to show you the way to look at the words and try to pick out what they mean just to get a feeling of it. Basically, he says, lo yatan, Lamed Aleph is the negative, so don't give Lamed, Aleph Vav, Lamed Mem. Lamed Mem would be the plural. And then Mem Vav Tet. Mem Vav Tet and Nun Vav Tet means to, like throwing a net. Tet's this round thing, like a picture a round fishing net that you can throw out, or a round retina, or like a target, like on a dartboard. That's all kind of a tet, or Nun Vav Tet, or Mem Vav Tet. Throwing down unto righteousness, Zadika. The idea here is this, he's not going to allow the righteous to be overthrown. That's kind of a Resh picture. And I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, if this is Zadi Kuf Resh, where do I back up and find, maybe there's the alphabetic sequence. Let me see if I can just see the alphabetic sequence. Again, just for sport, just for fun and games. So when I backed up to Psalm 42, beginning of book 2 of the Psalms, and it says, exiles called to be recalled. Where is your God? That's kind of an Aleph thing. Dispatched your light and truth. They will guide me and bring me. Well, that's like Bet. Why do you hide your face? If that's Gimel, then Psalms 45, Dalet, a maskil, a song of endearment. In verse 8, it says something about Yahweh has anointed you. Well, that's the word Mashiach. Is he talking about Solomon? Is he talking about David? Because you love Zadik and hate Rasha. Because you love righteousness and hate evil. He says, Hey Vav Zadi Kuf, he's poured out Chet Nun, which is translated as grace, upon your lips, or in your lips, would be Bet Shin, Pei Tav, Vav Tav, Yod Kaf. That's verse 3. So the main thing of verse 45 has to do, or chapter 45, has to do with this concept of Mashiach, him pouring out Chet Nun, grace, but Het Noon is also encampment. It's a like where you get the word Khan, like Genghis Khan, a warlord of all provisions. Hanani is where you get the word for daisy or something graceful and charming. Upon your lips. See, the word Mashiach is not just anointed, it's the conversation, it's communication. Because you love righteousness and hate evil. So somehow, whether that's referring to Solomon or David or you or me or any of us, that prerequisite that Elohim is finding the bearing within us. You like watching those videos where it's just blood and injustice and people doing horrible things to each other? Does that feed your soul, or do you detest that? Is there something about righteousness and chen, grace, that feeds your soul? Because you love Zadik and hate Rasha, Yahweh has given you or placed the communication, the conversation, and poured, that's verse 8, and then verse 3, and poured Het Noon into your lips. Well, there's something about this language of Hebrew which serves to do that, as we discussed last week and the week before, better than any other language there is. And that's the letter Dalet. That would be the Dalet position if I started. And I'm just plugging this in like an overlay grid to see where things fall. What's Dalet? Well, Dalet's the Messiah. He said he's the... Why is he the Messiah? Why is he Mashiach? Because he has a heart for Zadik and hates Rasha? Or is that Dalet is our choice? We as humans are given a soul, a personal identity, an Aleph. We're given a body, a Bet. We're given mobility to move around, Gimel, in time and space. And then we're given Dalet, the opportunity to choose. And then Hey, we're given the suggestion to choose life. And Vav, this is the connection, and Zion is a cutting off. Well, if that's the case, then Dalet I could read as my choice. It's my choice to determine who I am. What is my affinity regarding Zadokah and Rasha, good and evil, righteousness and evil? If I could look at chapter 46, and it talks about just when the earth collapses and the mountains, there's that Memvav Tet, are thrown down. When things we thought were true are found to be not. When that we thought was solid was all found to be lies. What do we got? Well, in verse 12, Yahweh Zavot Nu Mem Shin Gimel Bet Lanu. Yahweh Zavot, we his people, we the people of Yahweh Zavot, he is our stronghold. The Mem Shin Gimel Bet. Well, Gimel Bet, if you look at that word, because Mem could be a prefix and Shin could be a prefix, you have cistern, vault, to collect, pile up. High, it's a word for eyebrow, and it means to gather words. It's to gather something up and make a pile. That's the word Gimel Mem, back and forth. Keep going back and forth and moving things and piling up. It's a Gimel kind of a thing. The Elhi Yaakov Selah. Selah means stop and think about it. But the word Yaakov means that which follows. Kuf Bet. Yod Ayin Kuf Bet, Jacob. When everything has fallen down, the stronghold is in the words that we have gathered up. It seems to me he keeps making it clear that the key, his hidden treasure, is in the words. And the key to the treasure box is you got to look at them in Paleo-Hebrew according to the Mishkan pattern. The whole thing opens up. If you just look at it as Hebrew, you're not really going to see it. If you translate the Hebrew into English or Greek or Latin or some other, it's just not going to be there for some reason. And then you will look at, if that's the hey saying, hey, look at that, here's where it is. Then the next one, Psalm 47 in the Vav position, verse 5 says, Aleph Tav is the heritage of Yaakov, the heritage, the inheritance, what he has promised and stored up to give to the descendants of Jacob. Because Jacob is not just the name of the patriarch, but it's that which follows Aleph Tav. What does that even mean? Well, if you're not looking at the language, you don't know. If you listen to the Jewish teachers and they say, nobody knows how to translate that, it's meaningless. It's just a grammatical device pointing at the noun that is acted on by the verb. Well, then it's not your heritage. But if you figure out what all this stuff means and you realize everything this stuff means is ours, it's like finding, the Tzedekei Act, it's like 500 years ago, according to the Tzedekei, is just a French word, or talking about 500 years ago, the king and the church conspired to rob everybody of their, you might say, their ancestral heritage until they could prove they're alive. How do you prove you're alive? Who do you prove to? In a court of law? You go to a court for the dead and prove you're alive and somehow buck the system and get your stuff back. I'm saying it's one of those kind of things, but there's more to that story. But for, why would this be in the Vav position? Well, it's just there. But if I'm looking at it in sequence, but I'm saying Vav is a bridge. Vav is a connector. Vav is a man. Vav is if he says you have the right to choose, Dalit, and I'm going to suggest that you look at these words, and then Vav is, okay, you connect. It's like you shifting the gear with your hand on the gear shift. And you plugging in and saying, okay, this is what I'm doing. Aleph Tav is the heritage of Jacob. Verse 5 of Psalm 47. So I'm going to determine to take that as the reality. Then everything contrary is not true. And if Aleph Tav includes the story, Israel's told what to do, Israel forsakes it and goes wandering after other Elohim Achrim, Israel inherits the curse instead of the blessing, Israel gets trashed and ravaged and cast across the face of the earth like dust in the wind, but Israel's allowed to come back after the 2,730-year curse, and they get to come back. And when they do, they'll come back to these words that he's held and retained for us. Then that's all the story of the truth. But I've never heard anybody lay it out that way. It's just, but there it is. And if that's Aleph Tav, and if this is all that he has for us, then I can go, woohoo, this is ours now. The next letter, Zion, lines up with chapter 48. Walk around Zion, count her towers, recount to succeeding generations. Well, there's that verse about count the towers. What towers? So I have to be able in my own mind to say, I think these 22 matters are the towers. And I think the concept of Emet, Hesed, Mishpat, and Zadikah are the four big towers, with the other 22 towers, you might say. I choose to believe that. And that Zion, that's the set apart distinction. Okay, then wait a minute. And this is what I saw. Is like, but if chapter 53 is the Zadi, and here we're at 48 is the Zion, there's not enough letters to fit in between there. So maybe I'm just completely wrong in my association of these things. If I jump ahead to chapter 56, which if 55 was on the Resh position, then this would put that in the Sheen position. On day I fear you, on the day I fear, I trust in you. Yom, Aleph, Yod, Resh, Aleph, that would be the word for Yod, Resh, Aleph is fear. Ani, Alika, Aleph, Bet, Tet, Het, which is trust with secure confidence. And then that's in verse 4, and then verse 13 of Psalm 56. Aleph, Shin, Lamed, Mem. Well, see, Shin, Lamed, Mem is like shalom, but shalom has a vav in there. So shalem is to pay everything full, or to be surfeited, or to be whatever was promised is now made real. There's a phrase in Israel, ma shlom ha, and it's translated, hey, how's it going? What's up? Ma is the word what, or is it how? Is it what, or is it how? Ma, mem hey. It could be like lama, lamed mem hey is the word why. So it's just this question of what's going on. Shlom ha, well, that's the word shalom is peace. So if somebody walks up to you and say, ma shalom ha, it's like, how's the peace? How's the fullness? Well, see, in English, it's like, how's the fullness? If I said, how's it going? What's going on? What's up? How you doing? Ma shalom ha. Or you could say, ma sameach. How's your rejoicing? Or picture any verb. What I'm saying is that this Hebrew thing is the syntax is structured differently than in English. And so when you're reading the verses and you try to put these things together, I will shalom, verse 13, todat, tav, vav, dalet, tav, laka. I will fulfill, or I will give fullness, I will accomplish praise, thanks, and confession to you. Then it goes on to say, lamed hey, tav hey, lamed kaf. Lamed, for the sake of, as regarding, the, lamed hey, tav, well, excuse me, hey, lamed kaf is halakha, so that's walking. So out of this whole 6-letter word, the last 2 letters is laka, to you, or halakha, the 3 letters is walking. Lifnei, according to face, or in the countenance. Elohim ba'or, that's of light. Hey, het yod yod mem. Well, het yod is life, so the light of life. So you say, okay, then I'm going to shalem, or I'm going to fill up, giving thanks, praise, todah, to you as my way of walking in your face as the light of life. See, he's not talking about offering a bunch of sacrifice of praise, the zavach halal. The light of life. In his face is the light of life. Well, if I'm considering that these matters of these letters are the face of Yahuwah, and they include the Moedim and the Sabbath day and the meaning of his name as per the letters Yodhe Vavhe, and if that's the light of life, then what about all those great worship services that the Christian church is having? They seem to be basking in the Holy Spirit. Are they not having the light of life? If I try to discount what they're doing, I'll get into trouble. I'll get very confused. If I just try to look at what Yahweh says, there seems to be a light of life, of his face. It's not about me trying to discredit them. I just don't see that stuff in here, or that I don't see why they're not acknowledging his stuff in the midst of their stuff. So I'm not going to try to discredit somebody else's worship. I'm just going to try to get myself on track of his regard. But like I say, if I can say, well, what does that got to do with the letter Sheen? Well, the letter Sheen is the monogram of El Shaddai, the purveyor of all benefits, the overwhelming champion, destroyer of all opposition. For me to declare his praise is that acknowledging that. The reason why people have a mezuzah, Jews will put a mezuzah on their doorpost. The doorpost itself is called a mezuzah, and it typically has the letter Shin on it, drawn on it. That letter Shin symbolizing his name. This is our regard of El Shaddai. It's not a Christian tradition to do that. It's a Jewish tradition. Well, anyway, as we're approaching the back end of the alphabet, the next chapter, Psalms 57, would be in the Tav position. In verse 7, it says, "They prepared a snare for my footsteps. My soul is bent over. They dug a pit before me. They fell into it." It's like, wow. That's the Tav of the Aleph of Psalms 42. So when our enemies go, look at you, paying attention to all this stupid stuff, bent over, concerned, where's your God? You want to know where he is? You dig a pit for me. He's going to push you into it. So I can read into this that Psalm 42 as an Aleph is Taved at Psalm 57. Wait a minute, but that leaves me this space in between. If Psalms 48 was at the Zion and Psalms 53 is at the Zadi, that doesn't leave a whole lot of other room. And all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, unless it's the Mishkan pattern that fits in. So at Psalms 49 being Het, Tet, and Yod, Adam was made Bet Yod Kuf Resh, which is to say precious and dear and special. But if he doesn't understand, he's a dumb animal. That's verse 21. My heart meditates on the phonetic pattern for wisdom. Verse 4. Hey Gimel Vav Tav. Vav Hey Gimel Vav Tav. That's meditating my heart, Lamed Bet Yod, Tav Bet Vav Nun Vav Tav. Well, that's the pattern. But they say it's understanding, for understanding and wisdom, Chakama. But see, the same word for pattern is the same word for understanding. So what I'm saying is that this concept of what was Solomon understanding? What was Solomon having wisdom about? What is it that set Solomon apart from anybody else on the face of the earth? The fact that David, his father, was obsessed with Yahweh's words. And as we said, before David, we have record of Samuel and Moses, Abraham. I mean, who had time to look at Yahweh's words? David, that's it. And then handed them to Solomon. There wasn't many people who had the time to sit and look at this stuff that we have record of. What I'm saying is that to sit here and say, to contemplate the alphabet, to contemplate the words, the meanings of the words, the patterning of the words, and thus provide a wisdom of the way the world is built, means that you have to know that Yahweh sustains that way it's built. Not only sustains it, but he's going to make sure that it always works. And when he says, oh, he has one project, and that's to return a man's way on his own head. And when I saw he said that, I then saw he said it maybe 100 times through scripture, returning a man's way on his own head. That's what he does. Okay, then we got to count on that. We got to believe that. So whenever we're provoked to do something that's unrighteous or that's maybe evil or to bring harm that's not truth or kindness, we got to starve ourselves and play into putting on our scales, on our side of the scales of balance, Emet, Chesed, Mishpat, and Zadokah. Justice, righteousness, even to our own hurt, if it seems so at the moment, and it'll play out. I saw Jordan Peterson recently. It's just a little clip of his where he was making a statement to that effect. And he's this guy that, gosh, he's making somebody said $80,000 a week or something. I mean, he's making a fortune. He's a very popular speaker, and everybody thinks he's like this, kind of like the wisdom of Solomon. And he was sitting there, this one little clip of him saying, whatever you do in life, you're going to pay the piper. Don't think you're going to get away with anything. You're going to come. Where did he get that? He had to get it from Yahweh's words. Anyway, the point is, if I looked at Psalm 49 as Het Tet Yod, then Psalm 50 would be Kaf Lamed, lining up with the Torah instructions as written in teaching and learning. And this is where in verse 5 he says, my chesed, chasidi, Kaf Resh Tav Yod, then Bet Resh Yod Tav Yod. So I have written my covenant. Ayin Lamed Yod would be highest, Ali, like El Elyon is the most high. Savach, well, that's the word for sacrifice or feasting. So it's almost like it's the ultimate sacrifice. I've written my covenant, the ultimate sacrifice, Zavach Todah, the sacrifice of praise. And the one who does this honors me. That's the word kavod. And Shin Mem Dalet Resh Kaf, and there his walk, or you could say the place of his generation, Aleph Resh Aleph Nun Vav. Aleph Resh Aleph means to gather or burn. Resh Aleph has to do with Resh Aleph Hey is seeing. Yod Resh Aleph is to fear or give reverence. So what I'm saying is that even the word Derek, like the word Dalet Resh Kaf, can mean your generation. Or it can mean way, Derek, the way of walking. But then it goes on to say Bet Yod Shin Ayin, which would be the salvation Elohim. So he's talking about the ones who are giving this sacrifice of praise honors him because he's written this covenant in his kindness, or his kind ones, chesed, secret foundation of refuge. If this is in the Kaf and Lamed position, anyone who disregards what's written, thinking that it's nailed to the cross, done away with, it's for a previous culture of a previous time and has no pertinence to us, is turning their back on his kindness, is turning their back on honoring him, and are turning their back on making an evident salvation. That Aleph Resh Aleph, I will make manifest. Nun Vav could mean to us. It's our, it's word possessive. The idea that we've been told that the Torah doesn't concern us. There's a group called Supertramp, did an album way back when called Crime of the Century. This is more the crime of the millennium. Maybe even bigger than that, the crime of the ages. To be told by the people that we trusted to tell us the truth, to be told the exact opposite. Gosh. Psalms 51 would be in the position of Mem Nun. Verse 19 says that he is looking for a broken spirit, humbled, which is the word Nun Dalet Kaf Hey. A Ruach Na Shavara. Shin Bet Resh, Shabar, shiver. It's the word for cracked corn. And you remember hearing, people on the high seas or pirates, shiver me timbers. What does that mean? Shiver me timbers. It's Hebrew, shavar. Shin Bet Resh means to shake and rattle. So if his legs are shaking, shiver me timbers. Shiver is to be broken. So what he wants is somebody to just say, all right, confess. That word todah means confession, sacrifice of confession, a feast of confession. Confess your sins, you sinner. I'm going to confess that we were all lied to. I'm going to confess that we didn't want to do his stuff anyway because it seemed to be impractical and no fun. Or I'm going to confess that I don't know. I don't even know why I believed the lie. I never looked into it. I'm going to confess that we, being his people, have been so stupid all these years. Brought it on ourselves. But here we are, and he said we could return, so let's return. That's what Daniel said. That's what I think it was Nehemiah also said something like that. And then that brings us back to chapter 52, which would be Samech Ayin Pei. In verse 13, verse 10, it says, I trust in his chesed. And then Aleph Vav Dalet Kaf, I thank you. And Aleph Kuf Vav Hey, I hope. I trust, I thank, and give praise, and I hope. The interesting thing about that word hope, Aleph Kuf Vav Hey, Shin Kuf Hey is to give drink, Shin Kuf Vav is desire, and the word Yod Shin Kuf, I think it is, or Hey Shin Kuf Hey, is the word to kiss. So when Esau fell on Jacob's neck and kissed him, that actual word there is not kissed, but it's actually to give something to drink. So that the whole idea of this letter Kuf, what's in the letter Kuf? Hope, kiss, drink, desire. It's something that you've been craving that he finally allows you to have. Why is the history of the earth the way it is? Het Kaf Mem, the wisdom, the big white fence, the barbecue grill, the laver. If I take that, reiterating what I said a couple weeks ago, choose life, but you have to be cleansed by the ashes of the red heifer, the sacrifice outside the fence. That's Yeshua's crucifixion. You come inside, there's another place of sacrifice, and that's where you lay yourself down to learn of his Torah and change your ways. You might say intellectually, practically, but then the memnun at the laver is in your heart he said, I will put my ruach within you, and you will want to walk in my ways. You will want to do my stuff. If that's at the heart of wisdom, to understand that dynamic, to know who is the Elohim of Israel. He's not like any other Elohim. He's not necessarily the Jewish God or the Christian God. Who is Yahweh's Avot, the Elohim of Israel? You got to know that. And then you got to realize how he built the world, that a man's way is returned on his head. And if you love righteousness and turn away from evil, then the chesed of Yahweh will be your refuge for certain. That's the truth. Anything contrary is not true. And then when Moshe said one of the last sentences he said to his people before he died, he was taken away, he said, your enemies will try to deceive you. It's the only weapon they got against you that works. They'll try to deceive you. But we have his words. Whatever Solomon had, he didn't have Yahusha that we have. He didn't have all those great words of the New Testament. He doesn't have the books of Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah. I would maintain that even though it was said that Solomon was given wisdom beyond any measure of any man, that we have accessible, actually a better, clear view of what's going on than Solomon had, unless he was given something that I have no way of touching base with. But the only way to understand anything Solomon did was in light of this stuff. And it's interesting that the one place where the people said, "Oh, Solomon, he sure has wisdom." Two women were arguing over whose baby this was, and he said, "Cut it in half and give half to each one." "Oh no, give it to him." "Well, that's the real mother." 5 minutes. That was the manifestation that convinced everybody this was a real wise guy. So that he could rule the people of Israel with justice. Rule the people with justice. Well, there's not a whole lot of stories. If you read the book of Ecclesiastes, it'll look like Solomon took advantage of his position, his wealth, the fact he didn't have a war budget. Later, he was, as a punishment, he had some enemies. But for many years, he had no enemies. So he was able to just spend money on gardens and architecture and horses and pavilions and parties, and said, boy, this is all pretty worthless. That's the way he kind of ended up Ecclesiastes. And some question whether Solomon even wrote that book, but it's my understanding that he did. But the idea that Solomon wrote a bunch of proverbs, or he collected proverbs that other people had written. So Solomon was trying to find who's written things that are true that we can count on. There's this one thing that comes up on the internet. It's called Philo. I think it's Philo Thoughts. Philo is the word for love. Philosophy, Sophia. Sophia is a Greek word for wisdom. Philosophy is love of wisdom. But the idea that in that particular thing, they just come up with really smart things that people have said all through the ages. It's interesting to read. Some people in life look for truth and look for how things work so they can make decisions to play into it. And as I'm listening to those things, I have deep regrets for times when perhaps I didn't play into it, not knowing or foolishly or whatever the case. In one of these Psalms, David says, I think it's in Psalms 34 somewhere, he said, Ashri, which is praiseworthy, or it can be translated, happy is the man whose sins are forgiven, whose iniquity will not be accounted to him. It's like, gosh, you do stupid stuff when you're young. You don't know any better. You're challenged by your friends. You're provoked by other foolish idiots of peers. Doesn't matter whose fault it was. To be able to have our slate cleaned and make decisions from a perspective of truth and kindness and justice. That's everything. There was this other video of this lady who was talking about the mind is constantly being built and rebuilt, modified for the better or for the worse, your choice, even up until the day you die. Your mind, your brain is always being refigured. At any point, the things you think about are building the synapses in your brain. There's more on that subject we could discuss if people are interested. But the point is, I forget this lady's name. It was Karen something. This Australian lady. She's incredibly gifted, smart. Talk about health and healing. I would highly give the recommendation. We can bring that up in the chat. But my point is, talking about that the way you think builds the structures of your brain physiologically, and the things you think about, and if you consciously forgive somebody, or the way the words you speak and goes in your ear modifies your own brain. The contemplating of Yahweh's things, the thinking in his language, of his Moedim, and not just, Passover. Yep, Passover. How much can you think about Passover? It's the meditation, it's the contemplation, it's the thinking of the spelling of words and how it all fits together, I think, is what gives us this task in accomplishing, in some extent, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It's not just this request, it's actually he's given us a way to make that happen by the pondering of these things. There you go. What's that sign behind you saying, Kurt?
Stellar rain.
Stellar rain.
Heavenly Father, we just thank you and praise you. Odula Waki Tov, Ki Leolam Kesdo. Father, we thank you and we praise you for these words that you have placed upon our heart. May the light that Eric brought forth today shine brightly through, and may your brilliance be our brilliance. Because we love you and we praise you, we ask that you continue to lead us in all your ways. Abba, thank you for your Ruach HaKodesh. May it pour down upon us as we ponder upon the mystery and the meditations of your word today. Thank you for all that you are and all that you do for your children, Yisrael. And may the blessings of Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov pour down upon your people so that we can move forward to receive this inheritance that you have promised us. Thank you for the hope and expectation that you have for us, this generation. Amen.